So in some ways, I got my prediction right. I did actually say, if you look at my videos before this fight, I think it was Final Thoughts, Manny Pacquiao versus Ugas. I did actually say that I actually think that Ugas can potentially be a banana skin for Pacquiao. Now, the reasons why I thought this would happen was because Pacquiao has been off for like 2 to 3 years. He's been inactive for 2 to 3 years. Well, the past 3 years, Ugas has been the most active welterweight in the welterweight division, right? He's fought, I think, 8 times in the last 3 years, which is quite active. On top of that, if you take into account that he's taller than Pacquiao, I think he's obviously Cuban, and he's got a very good amateur pedigree. On top of that, he's very slick. He's got a long reach. He's quite awkward, and he's a fighter that does like to fight in the pocket, and he's quite effective in counterpunching you. I feel like because of them reasons, I thought Ugas was going to be a bit of a problem for Pacquiao, and to some extent I was absolutely right. Obviously, my last prediction was that I picked Pacquiao to win, and the reason for that is because he's suspended belief so many times. There's been many times when he's gone up in weight and he's fought fighters that are just so much bigger than he is, and he's managed to beat the crap out of them. I mean, look at what he done to Miguel Cotto, look at what he done to Margarito, and I know this is like 10 years after his prime, but I just thought, even in his last fight against Furman, he completely disabled him and knocked him out and managed to beat him. This is a prime Keith Furman who was one of the best at the time. I think he was unified. I think he had the WBC belt and an IBF or something of that sort. He beat 2 champions, Danny Garcia, who at the time was very good, and he beat Sean Porter, and he's beaten several other good fighters. And Pacquiao went in there against an undefeated Furman, and he completely destroyed him. He completely iced him, and that was an incredible performance. Probably one of the best performances from an older fighter over a younger fighter, if you take into account everything. But just from that perspective, I thought, you know what, I'm going to give Pacquiao the benefit of the doubt. He's beaten the odds so many times, so I'm going to pick him to win the fight. But I did say that I think Ugas could be a banana skin for Pacquiao, and he did turn out to be that. Now, Ugas, the one thing I like about him is he's not like the traditional Cuban fighter, even though he's Cuban. He was obviously born in Cuba, and he was the national champion for Cuba for the past 5 fights. I think he's a 5-time national champion for Cuba. On top of that, he went to the Olympics and he won a bronze medal, which is still incredible. But in my opinion, if you look at Ugas' style, if you look at the traditional slick Cuban fighter, they're usually fighters that do like to use a lot of lateral movement. I mean, if you look at Rigondeaux in his last fight against Casemiro, I mean, he was moving quite a lot, and he was constantly moving and was constantly feinting, and he's a fighter that was on the verge of running. That's how much movement he was doing. If you look at Erislandy Lara against Canelo, he did a similar thing. But the thing I like about Ugas is that even though he's Cuban and he does have characteristics of a Cuban fighter, he's more of a fighter that likes to stay in the middle of the ring, and he likes to be a fighter that pressures you. And not only that, he likes to fight on the inside in the pocket. He's not a fighter that likes to move around too much. Don't get it twisted. I think Ugas has probably got it in his repertoire to do that if he needs to. But generally, his game plan is to meet you in the middle of the ring and put it on you. And if you look at Pacquiao in that fight, there was many times a lot of fighters, when they get overwhelmed with Pacquiao's speed and his volume, they tend to take a step back and they tend to go into a shell. But with Ugas just used a tight guard, and he kept countering Pacquiao, and he kept throwing punches at Pacquiao outside of his peripheral vision, and he kept countering him. And it was an incredible fight. This is a 43-year-old Pacquiao, yet he was still able to put on great performances like this. Even in a losing effort against Ugas, I was mightily impressed by his skills. Now, Pacquiao did mention in the corner, I think I saw footage where he mentioned that, and he said it in a post-fight interview, he mentioned that he had cramps in his legs, and I think you can see it in his movement in the fight. He wasn't darting in and out like he was against Furman. So I think what's happened is that the age has caught up with him. I mean, it was bound to happen. He's outlasted so many of his young contemporaries that were his rivals. Just to put it into perspective, Pacquiao is a fighter that started fighting professionally from the age of 15, so he started a long time before a lot of the fighters that he's beat, yet he's still going, while them fighters that he started long before they've retired. And I could give you examples of that. I mean, if you look at Timothy Bradley, Pacquiao was a professional at the age of 15. Timothy Bradley turned professional later, yet he retired before Pacquiao retired, and Pacquiao's still going. So eventually, you could only fight off Father Time so many times. Your body's only going to be cramped. Eventually, it's going to cramp up, and it's just not going to be the same. And I think Father Time has actually caught up with Pacquiao. One thing I'm happy about in this particular fight was the fact that Ugas was the one that actually got the win, other than Errol Spence. Now, the reason why I'm happy about that is because I feel like Errol Spence is already to some extent an established star. He's already been on pay-per-view, I think, twice. And on top of that, he's already won two versions of the undisputed title, which is he's won the IBF belt and he's won the WBC belt. Now with Ugas is a fighter who's a dark horse. He's a fighter that's a lot of fighters avoid. A lot of people thought that he beat Sean Porter, but he didn't get the decision. I mean, he is literally a dark horse. He's a very good fighter, but he's a fighter that doesn't get enough credit. I mean, he's not mentioned in the same vein as a Terence Crawford or Errol Spence. He just isn't. But thankfully, after he has beaten Pacquiao, I think he's a top 3 welterweight at this point in time. And a lot of people might contend that. They say this is a 43-year-old Pacquiao. This is a Pacquiao that's had a 2-3 year layoff. Yet this is the same Pacquiao 2-3 years ago that beat Keith Thurman. So I think it's fair to say that Ugas is at least the top 3 welterweight. I'll put him on that ranking at this point in time. So and obviously, like, there's been talks that Errol Spence, when he does eventually come back, hopefully he will, he's gonna have to fight Ugas. So Errol Spence, I think he can beat Ugas, but don't get it twisted, it's gonna be a very difficult fight and it's not gonna be easy at all. So that's my point. I feel like if Errol Spence would have beaten Pacquiao, he would have become a much larger star. But to some extent, I'm happy that Ugas has beaten Pacquiao because it's allowed him to break onto the world stage now. After a winner over a fighter as popular as Pacquiao, his name is going to be reverberating through the boxing welterweight division, and now these other fighters can't avoid him as easily as they would have done before. And on top of that, he's an underdog. Let's be real. Like Ugas was kind of seen as like a bit of a pariah within the welterweight division. He was seen as a fighter that nobody wanted to fight because he's awkward, so he's high risk, low reward. But now that his profile's gone up a bit, I'm sure there's going to be more people that would want to fight him. Now, don't get it twisted, Ugas is not unbeatable. I think there's welterweights out there that could beat him, but I'm just happy that he's managed to get himself onto the world stage to some extent. So yeah, that's my opinion about this entire thing. What do you think about it? I found it a very entertaining fight. I thought it's a good if this is his last fight, it's quite poetic to some extent, because if you look at Pacquiao's career, when he first broke into the scene was when he beat Ledwaba, and when he beat Ledwaba, he was I think he took that fight on 2 weeks' notice. He was a replacement opponent for the Ledwaba fight, and at that time nobody even knew who he was. The commentators couldn't even pronounce his name on the broadcast. It was actually kind of embarrassing. They just couldn't pronounce his name. It was ridiculous. But then he just completely destroyed Ledwaba, and at that time Ledwaba was animal at that time. Nobody wanted to fight Ledwaba, and Pacquiao came in there and completely destroyed him and took his IBF title. And that was when Pacquiao emerged onto the world scene. Now, don't get it twisted, it was fights after that made him a star. When he beat up Barrera, that's when he finally became in that mix. He was a top fighter, and this is a Barrera coming off wins over like Prince Nassim and Eric Morales. So that's when Pacquiao really got onto the world stage. But in terms of him finally like getting the recognition of the public, it was when he beat Ledwaba for the IBF title, because Ledwaba was this slick southpaw, I think he was southpaw, slick fighter that nobody wanted to fight, and he was a fighter that was very, I think he punched very hard as well, and Pacquiao just went in there and completely destroyed him and took his IBF belt. And then at that point, everybody took notice. But the ironic thing is, Ugas done a similar thing. He was a 2-week replacement for Pacquiao, and so it's just poetic to some extent. It's like life has come back around full circle. When he broke into the scene, he was a 2-week replacement for an opponent that was supposed to fight Ledwaba, and that broke him into the scene. And if this is his last fight, then he got beat by an opponent who was a replacement for Errol Spence, and that's how he's going to bow out. So when he came onto the scene, he beat a fighter in 2 weeks notice, and he's now going to leave boxing and retire, if he is going to retire, after fighting an opponent who was a late replacement after 2 weeks. So to some extent I find it's poetic, and I feel like life has come around full circle to some extent. In terms of Pacquiao's legacy, I mean, in my opinion, he's you're talking about a top 10 fighter of all time, at least top 10. I mean, I don't care what anybody says. I mean, no, for some reason fighters of boxing historians don't like to give credit to fighters these days. They just think they're all cherry picking punks, but at the same time you need to give credit to certain fighters, man. I mean, Pacquiao's one of them. I think Pacquiao could have easily have competed in any era. He could have fought the Four Kings, the Marvin Haglers, the Sugar Ray Leonards, the Roberto Durans, the Thomas Hearns. He could have gave any of them a competitive fight, and I think he could have competed in any era of boxing, including the 90s when Oscar De La Hoya was at the top of his game, when Pernell Whitaker was at the top of his game. I mean, this guy's a phenom, and on top of that, he became I think he's an 8-time world champion in 8 different weight classes, and 5 of them weight classes were the original weight classes that were considered basically the original weight classes in boxing. So if that's the case, man, I mean, and 5 of them weight classes were lineal champions, by the way. They were not like he wasn't picking up a title of a fighter that was like forgotten, or someone who wasn't really the man but somehow picked up a title. He was fighting the main man for 5 of them weight classes. So yeah, my hat's off to Pacquiao, and I think it's a beautiful way to send him off, because in like he was that 2-week replacement for Ledwaba, he's actually and after he beat Ledwaba, he emerged onto the world scene. Obviously it's poetic in a way. Ugas has somehow emerged onto the world scene after beating Pacquiao after becoming a 2-week replacement. So yeah, I think it was a good night of boxing, and I really enjoyed it. So yeah, tell me your opinion about all of this. What do you think Pacquiao should do next, and how do you think Ugas is going to do against Spence? And that's just my opinions about this entire thing. It was a good night of boxing, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. I've got a lot more content coming your way. Peace out.